Hi, this is Vic and welcome to this episode of the Armourer's Bench Surplus Edition. Okay, what we're going to look at now, today, is the SUSAT scope. The SUSAT scope was made specifically for the L85 and L86 series of bullpup rifles that were in or are in British service with the military in the UK. The L86 is phased out. There may be one or two still used as test beds, but the L85 is now on the A2 and A3 modification list. I don't think there are many L85 A1s, if any, still extant in the military. They were nearly all converted by Heckler & Koch in Germany to the A2 standard. A lot of them have been remanufactured to A3 standard, where there's really only the lower receiver of the rifle still left nearly untouched. The upper receiver is completely brand new. But a lot of those A3s and some of the A2s now use the Elcan Spectre scope rather than the SUSAT, and the main reason for that is it's cheaper to service the Elcans. It's cheaper to buy a new Elcan scope than it is to service the SUSAT, and the reason being is that labor costs more than material, and you can buy a new scope cheaper than you can keep the scope serviced. And we'll go over a little bit of that in close-up and show you in fact how to fix the problem with all of these SUSAT scopes, which is that the tritium light source is now 99.9% dead in nearly all these scopes. And I don't think there is a program currently, or even for the past 5 years in British service, where they've fixed or replaced the tritium light source in these scopes. And I'll show you how to do that with a $5 purchase from eBay, but that's a little bit later on. Okay, what do we have here? We have an as issued L12A1 SUSAT scope with the mount for the L85, L86, SA80 series of rifles. And here we have a sight unit small arms Trilux SUSAT in a UT 12600R universal mount, or the Muller mount. This was a commercially sold scope, not British military issued, which was bought in quite large numbers by the Spanish military and fitted to the CETME Model LV second pattern rifle. So this was a version of the CETME Model L where the rear sight was demountable, and it had a set of rails which would take the Muller mount, because the mount on an L85, or sorry, L12A1 scope is proprietary to the SA80, which really was stupid. Why put a mount that's proprietary on a rifle when you might want to change it for a different optic at a later date? But the logic between the design of the SA80 series and Royal Ordnance is strange. And I know some of it historically back in the 80s, because I was involved in a program to possibly produce a semi-automatic variant for the US market, but I'll tell you that on another day. Needless to say, it never happened, but watch this space. You never know, guys. In the US, you might get the SA80. The bane of the British military might be coming your way. Enough said. Okay, so this was the one sold on the commercial market with a Muller mount, which I think is much better, much more superior to the L12A1 mount. The scope itself is called an L9A1 without the mount. With the mount, it's the L12A1. This green box is what it would have been supplied in, military. Great, you can tell difference. And these would have come out of depot storage like this. These have been available in quantity in Europe but not in the UK. 1s and 2s in the UK. And some people have been prosecuted or attempted to be prosecuted because the authorities thought, well, how can you have a scope of a British military rifle? That can't be right. Have they never heard of surplus? The trouble is that nobody understands that things do get sold off by the military and enter the civilian chain, and this is perfectly legit. These aren't stolen, they aren't British military property. They were at some stage, they've been demobbed. This is a civilian scope, slightly different beast. We'll show you the markings on the base of the scope which show that it is civilian issue or commercial issue, we'll say. And we'll see these in close-up in a moment. Needless to say, they're a good scope, and if I look at my specification here, I'll put my spectacles on, they're an optical magnification of 4 power. They have range settings on this version of 300 to 800 meters in 100 meter intervals. Some later versions go up to 1200 meters, and I've seen a mix of those, and there's not really much difference in the mount except the markings on the adjuster for the elevation. Sight unit small arms Trilux, or SUSAT L12A1 is the designation in service. There's a NATO stock code number which I'll put on the blog for this, and it has a field of view of 10 degrees or about 177 mils. It's a very good scope. I think it's probably the best part of the SA80 series, and it comes about with a fixation of the British military on low magnification or unit power optics, which started with the EM1 and EM2 series rifles, the bullpup rifles, in the late 40s, early 50s. Now, those two rifles had an optic on it which was unity power. It was basically a tube optic which aided point acquisition of targets. Instead of having to line up a front and rear sight, if you could see it and it was in the center of the optic, that was the aim point. And it was a very, very good scope in principle. In operation, the field of view was so narrow, I'm not sure whether it would have been really an excellent scope to use. I think that if the EM2 had gone on to be adopted and fielded, that it would have been upgraded at a later date. It's interesting to note that the BSA entry into the 280 rifle trials, the 28P rifle, BSA 28P, also had the same unity power optic on, and we're going to do an episode on the BSA 28P at a later date. But it's an interesting rifle and deserving of an episode of its own. Okay, going back to the SA80, let's do these in close-up, and then we're going to do a little bit of a repair or fix of the optics as well, and let you see how to do that. So we'll come back to that in a moment. This is the markings on the bottom of a SUSAT scope. Sight unit small arms Trilux L9A1. Like I mentioned before, L9A1 is the code, the British military code for the scope itself, not for the mount. The scope and the mount is L12A1, and this one was manufactured in 1988, so they're getting on a little bit. Okay, here is a close-up of the L12A1 sight as issued and fitted on the L85A1 and L86A1 rifles and machine guns, support weapons. As you can see, it is of a die-cast alloy construction, and we're going to open one of these up and let you have a look at the optics. It's a one where the hermetic seal is broken anyway, so it doesn't matter if we open it up. But as you can see, this is the rear of the scope. This is the eyepiece, which has a neoprene rubber cup on it, because the recommended method is that you place your you adjust the scope on the top of the rifle so that when you hold it in the firing position, your brow is touching or nearly touching this cup. And because the recoil of the rifle is so low, there's really no problem with it coming back and whacking you in the face. Along the top of the body, we move this slightly forward now, you can see the emergency backup sights. This is the front sight, this is the rear peep, but as you can see, the actual distance between these 2 points is only about 4 inches. It would be very much an emergency expedient to have to use this, and to be honest with you, at that point I think I'd probably throw the rifle at the enemy. Okay, if we look in the front, you can see the optic here, the front ocular point, and we can also see that on the mount, these are the adjustments on both sides for windage. It was changed twice in service, in that this screw, it was originally issued without a locking nut and without a locking washer, and the understanding that when you adjusted the windage, you would back off one side and then chase it with this side, and they're pointed screws, and you'd basically torque them up so that it was pressure, and it was hoped that the pressure on the center mount would hold it in place. In practice that didn't work because people couldn't torque it up sufficiently that it wouldn't walk, so then they issued it with an extended screw and a nut and a wrench in the cleaning kit to tighten it up. They found that that still didn't work and it would walk loose, so that they then put a foil washer underneath the nut in the hope that that would work. It still relies very much on the firer being able to cinch these nuts up and the screws first, then the nuts to lock them off with sufficient torque that they're not going to walk. I think they pretty much nailed it eventually, but it's still a very unsatisfactory method of doing it. The Muller mount, which we'll look at the moment, is slightly better, only slightly so. In the rear here we can see the user adjustment for elevation, and it's set currently at 300 meters. If we can see it in close up, figure 3 there, you can just about make it out, and this has a raised nub so that in the dark you can feel for it, although you've got to feel underneath this neoprene cup and you know that it's set for 300. You can then rotate that in 100 meter steps, so it goes 4, 5, 6, 7, and the maximum on this version is 8. As you can see, just, I think you can make it out, 800 meters. It's right next to the 300 meter nub. That's the full virtual 350 degree rotation. On the left hand side you can see the locking wing nuts to clamp the scope onto the mounting rail on the L85 or L86. On the reverse, on the right hand side, you can see there is a tab here which you can lift up, and if you look underneath you can see the locking stud which locks into one of the fixed mount holes on the rail on the top of the L85, L86. So you can move this back and forth. I think it's about 20 millimeter increments that you can move it. So it's quite a coarse effect. So you lift this up, move it, leave it, and it'll latch in position. Once you've got it in the correct position, you'll then tighten these wing nuts. And it's effective, it does work. The only problem is that on some rifles, the welds holding the scope mounting rail onto the 1 millimeter thick receiver body would rip loose. Don't try and carry an SA80 by the scope. Right, controls. The only controls are the windage which is fixed once set, the elevation, which is dependent on obviously the range that you're firing or hope to hit the target at, and this small knob here, which when I turn it around you can see it, this is the illumination control for the tritium element in the scope, and we're going to have a look at that. I don't know if I can get this to work. There you go. Looking through the scope, this is the pointer that you see. Those who are familiar with the SUSAT sight unit infantry trilux on the L1A1 rifles, and also the ones that were in service with the Israeli IDF on the M16, know that that pointer comes down from the top. It's inverted, which unfortunately tends to cover the target. So they changed it on the SUSAT so that it comes up from the bottom. And that very tip is illuminated by the tritium element in low light conditions or dusk. But we'll see that that doesn't work because the tritium element on this scope died a long time ago. Half-life for tritium is about 8 years, so they need to be changed about every 5 years, and these have been in storage for much longer than that. Now we're going to look at this brand new, unissued, new old stock SUSAT with a Muller mount. Okay, the mount is actually called a UT126000R universal mount. This is the mount that's fitted on the SUSATs that the Spanish military used on their CETME Model LVs, second pattern, CETME Amelis that the Spanish Marines used had these fitted, and now that the CETME Model LVs and Ls and the Amelis have been withdrawn from service, these scopes have now been retrofitted onto a lot of MG3s. The Spanish issue MG42 or new pattern MG42 in 7.62 NATO, which is unfortunate because the ballistics on the sight is for 5.56, not 7.62. Okay, similar but shorter mount. It has the same wing nuts. The windage adjustment on this scope is at the rear and not at the front, and it is adjustable not by opposing screws but by this nut, or you can use a wrench or a screwdriver on it, and it's marked left and right, so it's a little bit troop proof. The detent mount is very similar, and the locking screws here, and the elevation is on the front on this one, so you can actually zero the elevation as well, whereas you couldn't do that on the L85 mount. This is the zero and this is the adjustment. So this goes from 1 to 600 meters. I think it's a bit more optimistic than the SE80, which goes out to 800 meters, and the later ones up to 1000. It's a much more compact mount. I think it's better designed. It's certainly, I think, is easier to machine because it's machined from solid. There's no castings involved with it. An altogether nicer mount, much more compact as well. Not many of these flying around. You don't see them much outside of captivity. These are new old stock. I think there's less than 24 of them that I've seen recently available. And what we're going to do, this one again, the tritium light source is dead because it's just, the half-life has expired. So we're going to take the old tritium light source out here, from here, and put in a new one. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to remove this small screw here, which is it's only partially threaded. The end is blank, and it's used to hold this adjustment peg in place, and that allows the rotation. It has about a 120 degree rotation capability, and that all that does is it exposes tritium to the base of that optical pyramid to shine and then be concentrated on the tip. Now we haven't got the correct tritium element. We have a one which I think comes from a pistol. We'll put it in, see if it works. If not, I can recommend to you a slightly brighter source, or you can put in 2 or 3 of these pistol sources. They're only about $5 a piece, so it's not too bad. So first of all, we use an Allen wrench and remove the screw. Some of these are very tight because they've been Loctited in. Some come out quite easily. You can take the screw completely out. Don't lose it. There is a washer on it. I think it's a crush washer actually. As we can see, no, the camera's not going to focus on it, too small. Put that down out of the way. Take the adjustment knob and just rotate it and pull it out. There is a O-ring on it, and as you can see, there's a cavity milled away on the rod which has celastomer. It's a silicon sealant with the element is embedded within it. The element is about 8 millimeters by 3 millimeters, and we need to take that out. It's very easy to take out. I've done about 150 of these recently. You just put a small pointed screwdriver in and twist it slightly and lift that element out. Careful not to break it. The safety precautions state that if you break the glass vial, ventilate the area. Now there's not much in there, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but don't ingest it. As you can see, the silicon is still in there. All you have to do is catch the edge, run a blade of a screwdriver around, and presto, it's cleaned out. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put some silicon in that, let it cure off for about 2 minutes, and then put in our tritium source. Here is our tritium source. It's a 1.5 millimeter by 6 millimeter red, and it is a tiny little thing. You can see it highlighted against the body there. It's that small piece here. Now you can't see it. It doesn't glow very brightly, but we're going to have a go at putting this in. So let's get everything ready and carry on. Okay, so here we have some silicon sealant, and we'll put it in here to fill that cavity. As you can see, we filled the cavity, but we've got some smeared on the outside. Now I'm going to wipe that down with another cotton bud. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean. Once it's set, we can tidy that out. Then we take our tritium light source and position it centrally. Like I say, this is a one which is probably a little bit too small. But for a test, we'll try it out. I hope you can see that. Okay, you can see it just there. It has to be below the surface, because when you put this in, it doesn't want to scrape in the cavity or come loose. Okay, we're going to let that dry and cure. Probably should only take about 30 minutes, and then we'll revisit this. Okay, we've let this set now for about 30 minutes. I'm going to place it back in the site. Notice if we keep the tritium light source in the fully exposed position, find the center of the tube and gently push it in. Now we take the locking screw and make sure that it goes in easily, otherwise we have to rotate that knob slightly just to make sure that we're lined up. There we are. And if you're not sure, we can put a tiny piece of a bit of removable Loctite on there. Right, I guess the thing to do now is to look through the optic. Okay, let's have a look in close-up to an L9A1 SUSAT. Notice this doesn't have the mount fitted, a la this mount, which if it did, it would become an L12A1, specific to the L85A1, A2 series and the L86A1 series. Not sure if there was an L86A2. It was pretty quickly taken out of service. Okay, so what I've done is this particular unit needs some repair because the aiming point has come loose within the body. One of only a few hundred that I've gone over recently to take out the tritium light source for export. But this one we've taken apart. So if I lift the body off, inside we can see the optics. This is basically a prism assembly, okay, to make the optical path through the scope longer. This will enable the scope body to be shortened and be more compact. Consists of a prism, well actually two prisms fixed in a body. Prism 1 is here, prism 2 is here, and this is the output. So this is the input. So the front of the scope image comes in here and it exits here. We take the scope body itself, we can see there's a large cavity inside, and this optical assembly would fit in this way, like so. Put that down, move it out the shot. So we have the objective lens, the eyepiece, which is single lenses, and if we take out, let's get it close up here, if we take out the tritium light source assembly here, we can see at this point this small round piece here, this is the aiming post. Now it's a clear plastic rod that tapers to a point, but at the base, this is where the tritium light source shines. So if we look at the tritium light source rod, and I pick up an exhausted tritium light source here and place it in, notice we don't have the silicon that would hold it in place. It's approximately 10 millimeters by 3. It's squashed and it has an aperture in it which you can just about make out in the middle, like an eyepiece. That is the exit point for the light source. This one is dead, the half-life is well expired, so we'll remove it. But that rod goes in here, and you can see the cavity there. It would turn to expose more or less of the tritium light source to that rod, and that would illuminate it. If we can get in close up, I don't know if we can. You can just about make out the tip, which is picking up light from the camera lights here, and it's the end of the rod is glowing. If I cover that up, it does go dull and then brightens up again. Difficult to see, but as you can see, it does work. And if we look carefully, you can see the date of manufacture. Well, the last time it was refurbished on this scope, next to the Radiac alert sign here. And the date on this one is June 87. Okay, I'll reassemble this one after it's been rebuilt. That light source has been put back together. Okay, let's have a look at the mount. Mount's very simple, really. It just consists of a yoke, the top piece, and the mount, the fixed mount here, that actually attaches to the rail on the top of the rifle. Again, that rail is proprietary. It doesn't conform to anybody else's spec. Why they didn't make a Picatinny or a standard rail, I have no idea. In fact, I think it's probably modelled on something off an air rifle. It's quite ridiculously small and narrow. It doesn't have very much purchase, but those rails can rip off the top of the rifle. On the rear here we have the adjustment for elevation. Notice at this point it's at the lowest setting, which is 300 meters. Trajectory is fairly flat, and it goes round in 100 meter indents all the way up to 800 meters. There is a version that goes up to 1,000. This isn't it. This latch here is the course positioning for the rail on top of the S80. The wing nuts here are to clamp it on the rail. And if we look on the front here, we can see the windage adjustment screws. It's slacken this one, tighten this one, and that will cause the point of impact to move to the left, because you're moving the eyepiece of the lens to the right. And you have a nut here to ensure that adjustment doesn't come loose, and behind it the locking washer. Originally these weren't supplied with the nuts or the locking washer, so there's two levels of modification here to get the thing to stay put. And if you see any of the videos online of British soldiers zeroing this, what a pain in the ass it is. Okay, this has been Vic, and thanks for watching this episode of the Armourer's Bench, where we've gone over the two variants of the SUSAT scope, the British Army in service, or was in service version, the L12A1, and this the commercial version with the Muller mount, which is still extant out there. There are a few military still using it. The Spanish have repurposed all of the scopes that they have onto MG3s, and they're mounted on the feed cover which seems to be strange, because how do you keep the point of impact on a feed cover which really isn't meant to mount a scope? But that's up to them. The episode, I hope, has educated you to these type of optics, and if you're lucky enough to come across them, you'll know the difference between the two, and also how to service it now. So this has been Vic. Thanks for watching this episode of the Armourer's Bench. Please like, share and subscribe, and if you can, support us on Patreon. See you soon.